I stood there shivering as the snow piled around my feet, staring in disbelief at my wife Sarah and her family laughing at me through our living room window. 10 years of love and sacrifice, and this was my reward. Being locked out of my own house during the worst blizzard in decades, called a worthless idiot, and told to freeze to death by the very people I had supported for years. As their laughter echoed in my frozen ears, something inside me hardened like ice. They had no idea what was coming. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments section. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, and stick around to see how I turn this freezing nightmare into the warmest victory of my life. I met Sarah at 28, when I was establishing my career as a software engineer in the city. Life was going well professionally, but I often felt lonely in my downtown apartment, surrounded by the hustle of urban life, but missing that genuine connection. That all changed on a snowy January afternoon when I ducked into a small coffee shop to escape the cold. She was working behind the counter, her warm smile, a stark contrast to the frigid weather outside. Sarah had this captivating laugh that seemed to brighten the entire room. Her dark hair fell in gentle waves around her face, and when our eyes met, I felt that rare spark people always talk about, but I had never experienced. I became a regular at that coffee shop, ordering the same black coffee every day, just for a chance to exchange a few words with her. After 2 weeks of awkward small talk, I finally gathered the courage to ask her out. To my surprise and delight, she said yes. Our first date was magical. We walked through the snow-covered park, our breath visible in the cold air, talking for hours about our dreams and ambitions. Sarah wanted to open her own boutique someday. I shared my plans to advance in my tech company. The connection felt instantaneous and deep. As our relationship progressed, I found myself completely enamored. I would surprise her with expensive gifts, a designer handbag she had mentioned once in passing, tickets to Broadway shows, weekend getaways to countryside bed and breakfasts. Each time her eyes would light up with excitement, though I noticed she rarely expressed gratitude beyond the initial moment. Still, seeing her happy was enough for me then. 3 months into dating, Sarah introduced me to her family during a Sunday dinner. They lived in an impressive colonial-style house in an affluent suburb. From the moment I stepped through their front door, I sensed their judgment. Frank, her father, was a tall, imposing man, with a permanent frown etched onto his face. He barely shook my hand before asking about my income and career prospects, making no effort to hide his disappointment when I explained my role in software development. Martha, her mother, was more subtle in her disdain. She would smile tightly while asking pointed questions about my family background and education, each query feeling like a test I was failing. She frequently mentioned their previous vacations to exclusive resorts or their country club memberships, clearly establishing the social gap between our backgrounds. James, her older brother, was perhaps the worst. An investment banker with a razor-sharp tongue, he would make seemingly innocent comments that cut deep. During that first dinner, he asked if engineers at my level could even afford to live in the city, or if we all shared apartments with roommates like college students. Sarah laughed along, which stung more than the comment itself. Despite their clear disapproval, I remained polite and engaged. Sarah was worth it, I told myself. Once they got to know me better, they would surely warm up. Besides, I was dating Sarah, not her family. But as weeks turned into months, I began noticing concerning patterns. Sarah started asking me to cover our expenses, entirely claiming her boutique job did not pay enough. When I would pick up the check at restaurants, she never offered to contribute or even thanked me. It became an expectation rather than appreciation. More troubling were the times she would criticize me in front of her friends or family. She would make jokes about my modest wardrobe or how I was too frugal with money, despite the fact I was spending considerable amounts on our relationship. When we would visit her parents, she would join them in making subtle jabs about my career choice, suggesting I should have gone into finance or law, instead for the prestige and higher salary. There were nights I would lie awake wondering if I was overreacting. Maybe this was normal family dynamic. Perhaps I was being too sensitive. I convinced myself that once we were married, things would improve. Sarah would become more independent from her family, and they would finally accept me as part of their lives. Looking back, I should have seen these red flags for what they were. But love has a way of blinding you to reality, especially when you are desperate to believe in the fairy tale. Our wedding was an extravagant affair largely dictated by Sarah and her mother. Though we had discussed having a modest ceremony, Martha insisted her only daughter deserved nothing less than perfection. The guest list ballooned to over 300 people, most of whom were family, friends, and business associates of Frank that I had never even met. The final bill came to just over $70,000. Despite tradition dictating that the bride's family covers wedding expenses, Frank casually mentioned that since I would be joining their prestigious family, I should handle the majority of the costs. I depleted nearly all my savings to give Sarah her dream wedding, believing it was an investment in our future happiness. Our honeymoon was cut short after just 4 days in Hawaii. Sarah received a call from her mother claiming a family emergency, though it turned out to be nothing more serious than James considering a job change. I swallowed my disappointment as we packed our bags and returned home. Sarah spending most of the flight back, texting furiously with her family, instead of enjoying what remained of our romantic getaway. Once we settled into married life, I focused on creating a perfect home for us. I had been saving for years to afford a down payment on a house, and after months of searching, we found a beautiful 2-story colonial in a great neighborhood. The house needed some updating, but it had character: 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen that opened to a family room with a stone fireplace, and a large backyard with mature oak trees. The mortgage stretched my budget to its limit, but seeing Sarah's face light up when we got the keys made every penny worth it. I made sure both our names were on the deed, even though I covered the entire down payment and all the monthly payments would come from my account. I spent weekends painting rooms, installing new fixtures, and updating the landscaping. I wanted everything to be perfect for Sarah. When it was finally finished, I felt an immense sense of pride. This was our home, the place we would build our life together, maybe even start a family someday. That dream began to crack within the first month of moving in. Sarah's parents started visiting frequently initially for weekends, then extending to week-long stays. They would arrive unannounced, suitcases in hand, expecting to be welcomed and catered to. Martha would rearrange our furniture, without asking, claiming her interior design hobby gave her special insight. Frank would criticize everything from the neighborhood I had chosen to the brand of whiskey I kept in the cabinet. James would drop by during their visits, adding his barbed comments to the mix, often bringing friends who would treat our home like a free hotel. When I gently suggested to Sarah that perhaps we should establish some boundaries with her family, her reaction was immediate and harsh. She accused me of being selfish and unwelcoming. According to her family, should always be welcome at any time and for any duration. When I pointed out that they treated me like a butler in my own home, she dismissed my concerns, saying I was being oversensitive, and that this was just their way of showing affection. The financial strain grew increasingly worrisome. Hosting her family meant expensive groceries, higher utility bills, and often eating out at restaurants they selected, where the bill inevitably came to me. I started working overtime to cover these additional expenses, which only gave Sarah more reason to complain that I was not spending enough time with her and her family. My savings account, once healthy, dwindled rapidly. When I expressed concern about our financial future, Sarah accused me of being stingy. Frank often joined these arguments, boasting about how he had provided lavishly for his family, insinuating I was less of a man for worrying about money. He would tell stories about his golf buddies, successful businessmen and executives with vacation homes and luxury cars. The comparison always hanging in the air, unspoken but clear. The worst part was how they behaved when we had company over. My friends or colleagues would be subjected to subtle condescension from Sarah and outright dismissal from her family. After a particularly uncomfortable dinner party where Frank had questioned my friend Tom about his modest car choice in front of everyone, most of my friends stopped accepting our invitations. I found myself increasingly isolated, caught in a home that no longer felt like mine, married to a woman who seemed to view me primarily as a provider rather than a partner. Still, I held on to hope that things could improve. Perhaps when we started a family of our own, priorities would shift. Maybe Sarah would eventually see how her family's behavior was affecting our marriage. That hope grew fainter with each passing month, but I was not yet ready to admit defeat. After all, marriage was about working through difficulties together. Wasn't it I just needed to try harder, be more patient, earn more money? Perhaps that would finally win their respect and allow Sarah to see me as an equal partner worthy of TAFE, her love and consideration. The winter that year brought record-breaking cold to our region. Forecasters warned about a massive winter storm system that would dump over 2 feet of snow across the state, with temperatures plummeting to dangerous lows. My company had allowed most employees to work from home, but as a senior engineer overseeing critical systems, I needed to be on site to ensure everything remained operational during the storm. Sarah had invited her family to stay with us during the blizzard. Their reasoning was that our house had a better heating system and generator than their own, a generator I had installed and paid for after our first winter power outage. I was not consulted about this arrangement, but came home one evening to find their suitcases in our guest rooms, settled in for what looked like an extended stay. The day the storm hit was particularly challenging. I had been at work since 5 in the morning dealing with server issues that the weather had exacerbated. By late afternoon, snow was falling at nearly 3 inches per hour, and the roads were becoming treacherous. I called Sarah to let her know I would be late. The conversation was brief and tense. Sarah was upset that I would not be able to stop by the specialty grocery store her mother preferred to pick up ingredients for dinner. When I explained that most stores were closing early due to the storm and roads were becoming impassable, she sighed dramatically and said they would just have to make do with whatever was in the pantry, a pantry I had stocked extensively in preparation for the storm. The drive home was nerve-wracking. My sedan struggled through snowdrifts, the windshield wipers barely keeping pace with the heavy snowfall. Visibility was down to mere feet, and twice I nearly slid off the road. The temperature display on my dashboard read 5 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. All I could think about was getting home safely, taking a hot shower, and maybe enjoying a warm meal with my wife despite her family's presence. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was after 9. The house lights were on, casting a warm glow through the windows. I could see figures moving inside, and the sound of laughter reached me even through the howling wind. The thought of warmth gave me the energy to trudge through the knee-deep snow from the driveway to our front door. My fingers were numb as I reached for my house key, but when I tried to insert it into the lock, it would not go in. Confused, I tried again, thinking perhaps ice had formed in the mechanism. After several attempts, I realized with growing unease that the locks had been changed. I knocked softly at first, then, with increasing urgency as the bitter cold bit through my work clothes. No one came to the door despite the lights and movement visible inside. I moved to the side of the house, toward the large bay window that looked into our living room, and what I saw there froze my blood more effectively than the sub-zero temperature. Sarah, her parents, and her brother were gathered around the fireplace, drinks in hand, laughing. They appeared to be celebrating something. I knocked on the window relief washing over me when they turned to look. That relief evaporated instantly when, instead of moving to let me in, they continued to stare their faces, transforming into masks of contempt and amusement. Martha pointed at me, saying something to the others that made them laugh harder. Frank raised his glass in a mocking toast. James took out his phone, apparently recording my predicament for their entertainment. And Sarah, my wife, my partner, she just watched, a small smile playing on her lips, making no move to help me. I shouted through the glass, my words carried away by the wind. I pleaded, asking what was happening, why I was locked out of my own home. Frank finally approached the window, opening it just a crack enough for his words to slice through the night air. I think it is time you learned your place, boy. A real man would not have to work late. A real man would provide better for his wife. You are nothing but a worthless idiot who got lucky with our daughter. Maybe you should freeze to death out there. It would save Sarah the trouble of divorce. He slammed the window shut and pulled the curtains closed, leaving me standing in the dark, the snow piling around my ankles, the temperature dropping by the minute. I tried calling Sarah's phone repeatedly, but after 2 rings it went to voicemail. She had blocked my number. The reality of my situation began to sink in. I was locked out of my own house, in deadly weather conditions, rejected and mocked by my own wife and her family. 10 years of love, sacrifice, and dedication had led to this moment of ultimate betrayal. My fingers were losing sensation, and my work shoes were soaked through with snow, my feet beginning to burn with cold. Survival instinct kicked in. I stumbled back to my car, which thankfully started despite the cold. I sat there for several minutes with the heater running full blast, trying to process what had just happened and decide what to do. The nearest hotel was miles away, and in these conditions, driving there would be extremely dangerous. I remembered there was a 24-hour gas station about half a mile down the road. It wasn't ideal, but it would be warm and safe until I could figure out my next steps. I carefully drove there, the roads now completely covered in snow, with no other vehicles in sight. The gas station was open, its fluorescent lights, a beacon in the stormy darkness. Inside, a middle-aged man named Terry was working alone, surprised to see anyone in such terrible weather. When he saw my condition semi-frozen, clearly distressed, he immediately offered me a cup of hot coffee and a place to sit near the heater. Terry listened without judgment as I explained my situation. Rather than offering empty sympathies, he gave me practical advice based on his own experience with a painful divorce years earlier. His words cut through my shock and heartbreak. "Son, what happened tonight is not a tragedy. It is an opportunity. They showed you who they really are when it mattered most. Now you get to decide who you really are. You can either go back tomorrow and beg them to let you into a house and marriage that clearly aren't yours anymore, or you can walk away and build something better." In that humble gas station, warmed by cheap coffee and unexpected wisdom, I made my decision. I was done being used, disrespected, and taken for granted. It was time to take back my life and my dignity. I spent the night planning my response, and by morning I knew exactly what I needed to do. My first call was to Thomas, a college friend who had become a successful attorney. Despite the early hour and ongoing storm, he answered and listened intently to my story. His advice was clear and decisive: document everything, secure my finances immediately, and prepare for a difficult but necessary legal battle. Since my name was on the mortgage and I had proof of making all payments, Thomas confirmed I had strong legal standing. The fact that Sarah and her family had deliberately locked me out of my home during life-threatening weather conditions would work heavily in my favor in divorce proceedings. Thomas offered to start drawing up the paperwork immediately and suggested I find somewhere safe to stay in the meantime. My next moves were strategic and methodical. I called my bank and froze our joint accounts, then transferred my direct deposit to a new account Sarah could not access. I contacted all our utility companies, electric, water, gas, internet, and explained I would be moving, requesting immediate service disconnection. Since all these bills were in my name, the companies complied without question. I found a comfortable extended stay hotel and paid for 2 weeks up front. It had a kitchenette, good internet connection, and most importantly, it was warm and secure. I took the next 2 days off work, something I had rarely done in years, to focus on reclaiming my life. Throughout this time, I maintained complete radio silence with Sarah and her family. I did not answer calls from numbers I did not recognize, suspecting they might try to reach me through friends. I temporarily deactivated my social media accounts to avoid any attempted contact there. I was done explaining, justifying, and apologizing. On the 3rd day, the messages began. At first, they were angry and demanding. Sarah wanted to know why the heat had stopped working. Then the electricity had gone out. Then the water. With each utility shutdown, her tone shifted from indignant to concerned to increasingly desperate. By the end of that day, I had 47 messages from Sarah. They ranged from furious accusations that I was being petty and childish to tearful pleas for me to come home so they could talk things out. The final messages were frank admissions that she and her family were freezing in the house, as the temperature dropped, and they had been forced to check into a hotel. I read each message, but responded to none. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I went shopping for essential new clothes. I met with HR at my company to explain my situation, and was met with surprising support and understanding. I had always been a dedicated employee, and they were happy to help me navigate this difficult time. After a week of preparation, Thomas arranged a meeting with Sarah at his office. He advised me to remain calm, regardless of what was said, and to let him do most of the talking. When I walked into the conference room and saw Sarah, I was struck by how different she looked, smaller somehow without her family flanking her. For the first time, I felt nothing when I looked at her. No love, no hate, not even anger. Just a calm certainty that I was doing the right thing. She tried tears first, then anger, then bargaining. She claimed it had all been her family's idea, that she had been afraid to stand up to them, that she had always loved me. When none of that worked, she threatened to take half of everything I owned. Thomas calmly slid a folder across the table. Inside was documentation of all my financial contributions to our marriage. The down payment on the house, mortgage statements in my name, utility bills I had paid. Even receipts from the extravagant wedding. He also had a statement from Terry at the gas station, testifying to my condition on the night of the storm, and copies of the text messages Sarah had sent, particularly those admitting they had locked me out. The divorce terms were straightforward. Sarah would vacate our house, immediately relinquish any claim to it or my retirement accounts, and we would each keep our personal possessions. In exchange, I would not pursue legal action for the potentially criminal act of deliberately endangering my life during the storm. Given the evidence Thomas had compiled, it was a generous offer. The fight went out of her then. She signed the papers with a shaking hand, not meeting my eyes. As she stood to leave, she asked if I had anything to say to her. I considered for a moment, then simply replied, "Thank you for showing me who you really are before we had children. That is the only thing I am grateful to you for." The months that followed were a period of reconstruction. I sold the house, unwilling to live in a place with such painful memories. I accepted a promotion at work that required relocation to another state, seeing it as a perfect, fresh start. The new position came with a substantial salary increase. Ironic that I finally had the income that might have impressed Frank, just when it no longer mattered at all. I kept in touch with Terry from the gas station, our unlikely friendship becoming a source of genuine support. Unlike my relationship with Sarah, this was a balanced connection based on mutual respect. Terry had been through his own trials and emerged stronger. His guidance was invaluable as I rebuilt my life. The most important work was internal. I went to therapy to understand why I had allowed myself to be devalued for so long. I learned to establish healthy boundaries and to recognize the difference between giving from love and giving from fear of abandonment. I discovered that being alone was far better than being with people who diminished me. A year after the divorce was finalized, I met Amanda through a hiking group in my new city. Our connection developed slowly and authentically. She was impressed not by what I could buy her, but by who I was as a person. When she first came to my new home, she brought a bottle of wine and helped cook dinner, a simple gesture of partnership that moved me deeply after years of one-sided giving. I never told Amanda the full story of my marriage until we had been dating for 6 months. When I finally shared it one evening, she listened intently, then took my hands in hers and said something I will never forget. "That storm saved your life, John." Some people never get such a clear moment of truth. She was right. As painful as that night was standing in the snow while my wife laughed at my suffering, it had been the wake-up call I needed. Without it, I might have spent decades in that slowly deteriorating marriage, giving everything and receiving nothing in return. The greatest lesson I learned through all of this was that self-respect is not negotiable. When you value yourself, others will either rise to meet that standard or reveal that they do not deserve a place in your life. Either way, you win. I sometimes think about Sarah and her family during winter storms, wondering if they ever reflect on what they lost through their cruelty and materialism. But those thoughts grow more distant with each passing year, as my new life flourishes in ways I never imagined possible. Have you ever had a moment of clarity that changed your life forever? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey of overcoming betrayal and finding strength resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and redemption. And remember, your warmest days often come after the coldest storms. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to walk away from people who do not value your worth.